Hi, everybody. I think we're going to get started. I want to just reiterate again to welcome you to Pardes, and what an amazing moment this is for all of us. I first came to Pardes 29 years ago for an evening class in the late winter of 1992 during my first year of rabbinical school at Hebrew Union College. And I came back 1 year later for the summer session in 1993, and then again the following summer in 1994. And then I returned the year after that, 1995-96, for the year program. So I have a bit of a Pardes addiction, and it seems somewhat providential, like hashgacha pratit, that I ended up here professionally. My fellow Pardesniks that year that I did the year program, 95-96, included Rabbi Lauren Birkin, who's the vice president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, Rabbi Eli Confer, who's the president and CEO of Hadar, Noam Pianko, who's a professor of Jewish studies at University of Washington, and so many other friends who today are lay and professional leaders in Jewish life in North America and here in Israel. It was my year at Pardes when I came to finally really understand and experience in depth the notion of Talmud Torah, the study of Torah as a mitzvah. To experience what Louis Finkelstein described when he wrote, "When I pray to God, when I pray, I talk to God, but when I study, God talks to me." And I've discovered that. I discovered that first here at Pardes. I heard God talk to me through classic Jewish texts, both those texts that I accessed more easily and also those that I had to really break my teeth on. And I remember being in the Pardes Beit Midrash, having previously been one of the most informed, knowledgeable Jews that I know, and being struck by how many books surrounded me that I hadn't studied and that I didn't even know about. I remember feeling simultaneously exhilarated by the learning that awaited me, and also a bit embarrassed by how much I didn't know. And I imagine that some of you have a sense of what I'm speaking about. What I discovered at Pardes was Torah that was sensitive and responsive, Torah that was complex and nuanced and sophisticated, Torah that addressed pain and confusion, and Torah that was a container for deep joy. Torah that inspired me to create a Jewish life that was grounded in my own sense of individuality and integrity, and yet linked me to the larger Jewish people. Torah that was filled with self-critique. Torah that was a Torah of kindness, v'chol darchecha darchei noam, and a Torah of chesed, a Torah that gave me hope. I'm not a Talmudic scholar, but I love the Talmud, and Pardes furthered my love of Talmud. And I want to learn with you one of my favorite Talmudic passages that I think has a lot to say about us and about what we're doing here. So I'm going to do a share screen. You'll only need the PDF when we break into a very brief chavruta. So we're going to study a sugya that is about a situation which I'll set up for us now. It's about saving books from a fire on Shabbat. And the background assumptions of this question is that in general, it's forbidden to carry things from the private domain to the public domain on Shabbat. Presumably there's no Eruv, there's no Shabbat boundary. And so the question that the Mishnah and then the Gemara is going to deal with is, may you save sacred texts, may you save Sfarim, may you save books from a fire if it's Shabbat. And I want to take a moment before we even jump in to just appreciate what this says about the rabbis. Your house is on fire and it's Shabbat, And what immediately comes to mind is, how do I save my books? So the short answer is yes, you may carry out a book from the private domain to the public domain, but then the Talmudic mind goes to work and asks the question, well, what exactly is a book? How many words do you have to have for them to be considered a book? And so I want to teach very briefly this Mishnah and one Torah passage that will help us to understand the Gemara. We're going to break into a very short Chavruta session, and then we'll come back together and we'll conclude by 4:45 or 4:50 so that we can walk together and meet at the Tayelet. So here's the Mishnah. Kol kitvei hakodesh matzilin otan bifnei hadleka, bein shekorin behen uvein she'ein korin behen. So all sacred writings may be saved from the fire, whether they are publicly read or not. Here the Steinsaltz Koren translation sort of fills in the missing pieces, right? That there's lots of sacred books that are not publicly read. Right, we only read a fraction of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, in various haftarot, and we only publicly read a handful, literally a handful, 5 Megillot, 5 scrolls from Ketuvim. But even if it's not read, you can rescue it from the fire. And then it goes on to say, Af al pi sheketuvim b'chol lashon tu'unin geniza. So there might have been a question that, well, what if the book wasn't written in Hebrew? Is it still considered a sacred text? And here it reminds us that even sacred texts written in a foreign language need to be put into a geniza, suggesting here that you do need to save them from the fire. Umipnei ma ein korin bahen. And then this is kind of a tangential Mishnaic diversion. Why don't we read all of these books? And here I understand it to mean, why don't we publicly read them? Why don't we read them in the synagogue? Why do we only read a selection of the prophets and almost none of the Ketuvim? And we're told, Mipnei bitul beit midrash. And this requires some explanation. It's not really exactly on topic, but I'll just say that that to read them publicly in the synagogue would take away time that people are supposed to be in the Beit Midrash on Shabbat to study texts of Halakha and not these other texts of the Tanakh. Now that's a fascinating discussion that we'll have to pick up at some point. But here, I think where the Gemara is really going to go with, and we'll see this in a moment in Chavruta, is when they say at the very beginning, Kol Kitvei HaKodesh, all sacred writings. What do they mean by all? Or, as I suggested a moment ago, what do you mean by sacred writings? How many words, how much do you need for it to be considered a sacred writing? What's the minimum amount of words? So that is really setting up the study that we're going to do together. And I want to do one biblical passage that's going to be very central to the Gemara's explication of what constitutes a book. And that is these verses from Sefer Bamidbar, from the book of Numbers. These 2 verses, which in a Sefer Torah, as you can see at the top part of the screen, are set apart from the rest of the Torah text in an ancient scribal tradition by inverted upside down nuns. And the verses are familiar to many of us from the Torah service, from Hotzaat Sefer Torah. Vayehi b'nsoah Aaron vayomer Moshe kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. And then toward the when we return the Torah to the Aron HaKodesh, Uvenucho Yomar Shuva Adonai Revavot Alfei Yisrael. So I don't want to do a spoiler. I'm going to just leave it in abeyance. But what I want you to know is part of what's motivating the Gemara to deal with these two psukim, these two verses, is that not only are they set apart through this scribal tradition, but they're also set apart from the narrative of this particular chapter of the Midbar. It seems out of place, these two verses, that before it, we have the departure of Moshe's father-in-law, Yitro, and them saying goodbye to each other. And after it, we have the people complaining about food in the desert. So there is a sense, even contextually, of like, wait a second, what are these two verses doing there? So this is what I'd like us to do in Chavruta. And I think you may have the text both on, you don't yet have it on WhatsApp, but I will send it on WhatsApp. But it is in the chat as a downloadable PDF for your Chavrutot. And the sources that follow are four continuous sections of the Gemara, not the Gemara that follows immediately from the Mishnah that we looked at, but a page later. And I want to suggest I've divided them into section A, B, C, and D. I'd like you to focus on A, C, and D. And only if you are an advanced student and you can read this very quickly, then do B as well. But be sure to do A, C, and D. And we're going to take, I think, 20 to 25 minutes. I'll give you a little warning in the breakout group. Everybody's being matched up randomly. So this is actually a lovely opportunity. Chances are you'll be matched as a chavruta with somebody who's in a completely different level than you at Pardes. And let me just stop sharing. And that is, that's a great opportunity, but also I want to remind you that you should adjust to a common denominator way of learning this together. So my colleague in New York, Simon, I think has us set up, and we can go ahead to chavrutas. Most chavruta will be 2, and there might be 1 chavruta of 3. And I'll see you in about 20 or 25 minutes. Zil Gamar, go and study. We don't have a lot of time, but I do want to, I want to provide a couple of minutes to hear some of your thoughts about what you saw in this text that spoke to you. If this were a typical Pardes class, then we would have a lot more time for your comments. But anybody want to jump in and just share with us how this spoke to you, what you saw in this?
I wanted to share, I was learning with David, and we were talking both about this as kind of a way in which there's a really interesting differentiation made between different sorts of what counted in a sense as a holy text. But then ultimately, had you put any of these sages in front of a burning building and told them the Torah scroll was inside, we also don't feel that they would have stopped to ask you about the letters. So trying to figure out kind of what then we can learn from this.
This is a very theoretical discussion. You kind of have to not be inside of a burning building to be able to think about this.
Right. Yeah. It's very strange to sort of think about what does it mean for us if we, yeah.
Right. And I think part of what you're asking is also how much of this is just about the issue of saving books, and how much is this a deeper, it's framed in halachic terms, but a deeper discussion about what is the meaning of a book. And that's part of the question that we're all here because we're interested in that question. Yisrael, you were going to say something.
Yes, because this reading the texts reminded me of another text from the Mishnah that I read long ago. I can't recall where exactly it's from, but it talks about the expression that which books make your hand unclean.
Right, by which it really means which are the books that are really holy.
Exactly. So I was thinking more, of course, I was thinking in terms of the priorities that they are setting for selecting the books, that which passage is written in Hebrew and which are the Aramaic translation and so on. But it also, I was wondering about the problem and the process of canonization, like if it has to do with canonization, like in the other passage. I mean, if the Torah is having a Torah text has the same priority as Shir HaShirim and so on. So
right, that's really interesting, right? Because here, for the sake of saving them from a fire, there's no hierarchy.
Right.
That even a text from Ketuvim, from writings that is never publicly read, has, for purposes of saving it from a fire, the same status. That's a really interesting point. Let me take one more comment, and then with apologies, because I wish we had another hour together, but we're sensing that you all could probably use a break. And now I want to share some of my thoughts about this with you. Somebody else want to jump in? One other person to share how this spoke to you? Okay, so let me offer a few thoughts. I love this text for all kinds of reasons, and my sense is that part of what's at play here is the imperative that words have to be rescued from the fire. And I'm thinking about the way in which we are the most broadly, secularly educated Jewish community in the history of the Jewish people, and yet equally without doubt, we are the least knowledgeable generation of Jews when it comes to knowledge about Judaism and Jewish books than any generation of Jews who has ever lived before us. And I bring that out because I want to emphasize the way in which your decision to study at Pardes is completely countercultural. You are, in essence, rescuing these books from a fire. You are declaring that these ancient texts have continued meaning and relevance. And when we look at the world these days, the world itself seems to be on fire. Fires of closed-mindedness, of demonizing the other. And there's a wisdom and profundity to these texts that we're going to learn together that address that offer insight into what it means to be a human being. And the methodology for studying these texts grows out of these texts themselves. And it's a methodology that models machloket l'shem shamayim, constructive disagreement. The value of learning from people who are different, who think about the world differently, the way in which these texts invite us, it welcome the sense of chidush, of a new interpretation, a different perspective. And the way in which these texts understand deeply that we have to find ways of balancing our universal commitments with our particularistic concerns. These ideas may very well be, these ideas that are inside of these texts may be the ideas that will put out some of the fires of our world. I love the section that really tries to nail down, using those two verses from Sefer Bamidbar, of what is a book. That a book is 85 letters, the letters in those two verses. And I don't know how many of you got to section C, but where we have this disagreement between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, and then a kind of resolution that the Gemara plays with. And what we really have there are three different criteria, each more abstract or more lenient. Right, the one opinion is, no, it's an 85-word passage is a book. And the more extreme position, the extreme opposite of that is, this is Rav Chisda, is 85 scattered letters. If throughout the whole book you can, or the whole scroll, you can gather 85 letters, then it's a sacred text. And then the compromise position, the common ground that the Gemara finds is, well, 85 letters, but not scattered as individual letters, but at least they're grouped together as words. So 85 letters in a series of scattered words. And to me, this sounds, in this act of saving books from the fire, this sounds a bit to me like the various levels of learning that we come to Pardes with. We are on different levels engaged in this larger project of saving books from the fire. Some of us will be tackling whole passages. Some don't yet have access to those whole passages, but have a vocabulary, have a collection of words which will anchor our learning. And some who are joining us are relative beginners, connecting individual letters as they begin to access the wisdom of Jewish life and thought. Finally, I want to think about this idea of that the Gemara chose those two verses from Sefer Bamidbar, the verses about the travel of the ark, the Aron HaBrit, as the metaphor for, as really the determiner that it's 85 letters. Vayihi b'nso Aharon vayomer Moshe. The ark which holds the Luchot HaBrit is defined by the story of a journey. It's as if this passage from the Gemara wants to teach us a book, if it's a sacred book, is a collection of words that are constantly in motion, like the ark. Right? If the ark becomes, if these verses about the traveling of the ark become the paradigm of what a book is, and the Gemara says those two verses are a book in itself, then we have to look at, well, what was unique about the ark? The ark was always in a constant motion. There's a negative mitzvah lo ta'aseh, that even when the ark is resting in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, you can't remove the badim, you can't remove the poles by which the ark is carried. It's a way of saying through the system of mitzvot that even when the ark is sitting still, you leave the poles in to suggest that it is still in motion. And so if we're told that a book is a collection of words that are in constant motion, then what the Gemara is really saying is that words are in the process of becoming, that words always say more than they appear to say, that books produce commentaries and commentaries inspire more commentaries. And that journey of the book is also our personal journey. The book for us, and this is why I think we're here at Pardes, the book is a group of words that sets us on a journey as well. Words that are leading us someplace else, that are leading us forward. Words that will prevent us from being stuck in the same place and prevent us from being stuck as the same people that we are at this moment. So when we save books from the fire, we do so knowing that they will set us in motion and they will set our world in motion. That their expansive, interpretive, ever-evolving nature will inspire us in our own process of growth and change and development. And that's really our bracha for all of you as we embark on this year of study. I want to conclude with a poem that I think speaks to this theme as well. This is by an American poet named Kate Light. And then there is that incredible moment. And then there is that incredible moment when you realize what you're reading, what's being revealed to you, how it's not what you expected, what you thought you were reading, where you thought you were heading. Then there is that incredible knowing that surges up in you, speeding your heart, and you swear you will keep on reading, keep on writing, until you find another not going where you thought. and until you have taken someone on that ride so that they take in their breath, so that they let out their sigh, so that they will swear they will not rest until they too have taken someone the way they were taken by you. We are so delighted that you're here. Bruchim habayim, welcome. And we'll all see one another. If you didn't get the WhatsApp, give you a little bit of a longer break at 6:15 at the meeting point on the WhatsApp on the Tayelet.